If I don't want to write, I'm not going to sit down and force myself to write, because once I do that, nothing comes out and it has to get redone. So when you feel like writing, write. If you don't feel like writing, don't do it. Find something else. Be productive in another way. Work on a cover, work with someone else, work on a blurb, do a podcast, watch a TV show that gets inspiration, but don't force yourself to sit down and do something.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Okay, everybody, so let's start with a little visualization. You've just been promoted to managing your first team. You're excited, ready to lead, implementing everything you learned, climbing the ranks. But within weeks, you're drowning. Your new Gen Z hires are resigning without notice. Projects are stalling over that seem like trivial arguments. Your hustle mentality that got you to the top is not failing, but actively pushing your best young talent out the door. If that scenario sounds familiar, you're not alone, because millions of companies are hemorrhaging Gen Z employees and most leaders have no idea why. Well, on today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be interviewing a successful author, decoding the strategies that he's used to solve real-world problems that keep business owners up at night. Our guest is Magnus Carter, a veteran entrepreneur who went from pushing 15-hour days in a stressful business to running a smooth, profitable operation, all by cracking the code and generational team management. His latest book, Making More Money for You, Working with Gen Z, is all about that. So without any further ado, Magnus, welcome to the show.
Danielle, thank you for having me on.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around, because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'm very happy to have you on. This is something that a lot of entrepreneurs could benefit from, and not just from the topic, but also the writing process about keeping up with such a current topic as well. So I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Before we dive into the book, though, I think it's important that we talk about you a little bit. I mean,
Sure.
you mentioned that watching your parents slave away precious years of their life in 9-to-5 jobs impacted you. So tell us a little bit about that and how that made you realize that you wanted a different path.
Well, I was pressured like pretty much everybody else in high school that you got to go to college, got to get a job, family, everything. I decided to take some time off from school and whatnot, so I went to New York. I worked hustling, bustling, waiting tables, a bunch of other small end jobs, and then I seen all these people start coming into the diner and whatnot, and they had the suits, they had the cars, they had the women, they had everything that I was actually looking for, and everybody actually wants. And through the process of being mentored by these people, is doing 9 to 5 is not going to get you rich. It's just getting you from paycheck to paycheck. And with that being said, nobody really succeeds with that. And you basically have a 401k that you slaved 80, 90 hours a week for to enjoy maybe 2 to 3 years of your life, of your life left, as long as you're in good health and you take care of yourself. So what I did was I actually started investing in the stock market. I started investing in IULs, crypto for a little while.
Mm.
And while I was doing this and I was traveling for work, it came to me, it's like, okay, people need this. People need to know that money is a tool to be used, but nobody knows how to use it or actually knows the processes, or there's actually other ways out there to make money instead of actually working a job. And
Mhm.
that's when I actually started publishing, writing, and started publishing. Like you said, the Making More Money for You series. There's 6 other books. As you said, I covered different topics. The main one that's the hot one right now is the working with Gen Z, because
Mm.
everybody that came out of college, especially after the pandemic and whatnot, don't have work ethic. They don't understand what the job is. They don't understand what they have to do. They don't have the tools to necessarily succeed in corporate America. You
Right.
know, a lot of the instructors, professors, they lived in their bubble their whole life with technology, but you have to actually be able to interact with people. And that's a culture shock, especially getting back into the real world now, and where all of us are still trying to find our way.
Understood. Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for walking us through that and how your experiences shaped your perspective on all of this. The Gen Z book, of course, is one of the most popular ones, it sounds like. So, I'd love to, dive into some of those tips. But before we get specifically onto that, I think it's important that we chat a little bit about what you've learned over these last 3 decades. Like, is there something that, surprised you most about when you realized these changes? Like, for example, when Gen Z started entering your workforce, like what was most surprising as you were picking up on that?
Honestly, as talking with them and seeing them as they're coming out of school, is they're being promised 60 to $70,000 jobs out the gate.
Mm,
A lot of colleges promise at least 60K plus, depending on the fields that they're working in. And it's basically any field out there that they feel they got a degree in is gonna just offer you a job at that. And with the job market the way it is, a lot of college students are lucky if they hit 40K, 40,000 a year plus. And with inflation the way it is and the way the climate is right now, a lot of Gen Z is actually still living at home, and a lot of millennials, even some of the middle-aged millennials are still living at home with parents because there's no jobs out there that they're qualified for.
right. Yeah, no, I get that. So I can see how that's definitely like just disrupting the pattern of what we would always expect. And I guess that means, what your book is telling us is different ways to counteract that. I mean, one thing that your book mentions is reverse mentoring,
Mm.
where Gen Z employees can train the senior executives. How does that work? And kind of seems like a flip flop from what you just said.
It is definitely a flip-flop. It's actually giving the new hires a purpose because
Mm,
they feel that they have all this technology. They're actually the first generation that actually had technology throughout their whole life, if you think about it. Millennials still didn't have it. When they were growing up, it was still maybe like 9, 10, teenage years. Gen X definitely before didn't have this, so it still came through. But having Gen Z actually mentor people, other coworkers, and build a rapport with them is so they can see from their side of view. Is there's so many new tools out there you can't keep up with them. There's always like 5, 6 other AI tools coming out that's so popular. PowerPoint, the Word, Zoom. Zoom's been in the last 2, 3, well, since the pandemic, it's like a staple now. And now there's so many offshoots of it. Not a lot of people have time to sit down and learn it. So,
No, absolutely. I get that. So I can see how it kind of, goes both ways then. You got to learn from one side in order to enhance the other. Both back and forth in that way a little bit. Um, so one thing that you also mentioned is that they want to work with purpose, not just paychecks.
right.
So tell us a little about that. I mean, someone needs to do the boring, repetitive tasks. So how do we make that purpose driven?
Well, you need to find out what they're actually good at. The interview process we can talk about later on, but the questions that from previous generations really don't work with this now. And trying to crack down on what a candidate's good for is you have to ask abstract questions now. Like, well, how the scenario questions are very well, but you have to put a twist on it now. So if you're asked, well, how do you see yourself in 5 years? They're more or less looking at the instant gratification of learning where they're going to be in the next 3 months.
Mm.
We got to change our mindset here. It's like, okay, where do you want to be in 3 months? Where do you want to be in 6 months or a year at the most? What purpose comes in is finding their passion about it. A lot of the new hires out there love social media, completely addicted to social media. They think it's the way of the future, it's life. Even though life is going on all around them, they still want to be in their little box and be they're starting their own little show. So when the purpose comes that if they can bring what they're trying to tell their followers into the workplace and transcribe it over to them, it would actually help benefit everybody that's around them. You know,
Understood.
it's more the interaction and giving them a purpose. It's like, okay, I can talk to everybody in this little screen, but now I have to learn how to do it and have the purpose and the drive, honestly, to actually make it happen in real life.
Understood. Yeah, and so I guess the book kind of goes into much more detail about that. I want to kind of circle back though too, because you mentioned the interview process, which seems to be another
Mhm.
big part. I'm wondering if you had to touch upon that real quick before we move forward into like other writing steps. So, what about the interview process do we need to keep in mind?
Well, one, not a lot of Gen Z people have work experience. So
Mhm.
they come right out of college. Kids don't even have part-time jobs when they're in school anymore or even summer jobs. They look down upon that now, honestly, and it's kind of sad because those jobs, those lower tier jobs gets us ready for and the mentality to actually work further later on in life. And they're starting out at a deficit with that. So the interview process has to be like, okay, well, you have a 4.0 GPA. Okay, great. You can read a book and tell me, regurgitate it. But now the interview process is how do you apply that information? You know, we have to give the abstract questions is like, okay, so you had this class, and this class. Okay, how is that practical in this position that you're hiring for? Because they can't do it with work experience. They have to actually cultivate and try to figure out. It's like, well, it can work like this or it might work like that. They don't know for sure, but they have to figure out also is the actual depth that they want to go into describing things.
Understood. Okay, yeah. So these are all things for people to keep in mind. And I'm guessing if we want like more actionable steps and guidance on that, the book goes into details and your whole series does too. Because this is just one book that we're dealing with here. We have a whole Making More Money for You series. It covers all diverse topics. So real quick, I'm curious to know what other topics can people be on the lookout for in that series?
In that series, getting started in cryptocurrencies, you know,
Okay.
the jargon behind it, the technology behind it goes into that, a little bit of the history. IULs, universal index life insurance policies,
Right.
uh, how you can actually combine both. It's more or less a money market account with a life insurance policy, and they both make money for you. You get money afterwards, and you can actually make money with the policy as you're still living, which is pretty nice. The mutual fund investing for beginners and budgeting, that is a hot topic for every all the new people. You know, they don't understand how to budget. They don't understand checkbooks. Money has limits. Once you learn what your limits are, the less trouble you're going to be later on in life, especially when you're on your own making money, uh, budgeting to get a car, to get a house, to get food and your internet, your cell phone bill. So there's that. Also, there's one with my last book, which is investing with adult children living at home. So that's kind of a prequel to this book. So a lot of people, parents thought they were getting their kids out of the house, but it turns out after they get college and there's no job out there, they're actually moving back into the house because either they don't have the right tools to succeed out there or they failed out there and don't know how to pick themselves up. So
Mm,
that book has a lot of key points on how to talk to your adult child on getting back up and also keeping your money safe so you still have retirement funds.
understood. Oh, okay. I mean, it sounds like you really just cover a range of topics. So if anybody's just interested in improving themselves financially in general, they can find something within your series that speaks to them and they could use insights about. So I guess the best thing for them to do is kind of head to your site and pick what works best for you. Where is the best place for people to find these books and to learn more about them, by the way?
Oh, well, they're on Amazon. Quite a few of them are on Kindle Unlimited. I also have a website, lpspublishing.com, and also the Making More Money for You podcast now that also covers a lot of topics, just like as we're talking with here, but I actually talk with experts in their field and multiple ways of making money, and that's on all your streaming services.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're gonna put the links in the description box of this podcast today, so you guys can all click on over and learn more about it. But now that we've chatted about, the book, the series, a little bit about you, I think it's important that we dive into some writing tips because this is an author's podcast, so people are super interested in learning, how you created such insightful, informational books while also keeping it engaging. So, tell me a little bit about this. I mean, the Gen Z book, for example, is very balanced. You don't bash one generation or another. You present both sides with empathy. How do you maintain that balance while writing, especially when introducing, somewhat controversial topics?
Well, that's an excellent question, Danielle. The way I wrote the Making More Money for You series is actually as if we're having a conversation.
Mm,
There's no jargon. If there is jargon, it's explained in a way that anyone just starting out, anybody that's a professional can understand the books. There's little tips and tricks throughout, little did you knows, and breaking it down to knowing the audience on what you're trying to communicate, like the interview questions. In the interview question portion of the book, I break it down by, okay, these are some types of questions to ask, why these questions are relevant, and what purpose you'll actually get from an answer from your candidate. So it's broken down in multiple small steps to make a giant stride.
understood. Well, okay, I like that. Yeah, I mean, just kind of conversational, right? As if you're one on one, just laying it out for somebody. And like I mentioned before, you make it very relatable. It's very accessible, especially because it is complicated subjects you know, to take in. So yeah, that's all really important. Now it's also, of course, had to include a lot of research to make sure that everything was
Mhm.
accurate, fact checked, so that you're not just presenting information willy nilly. So what about that research process? I'm assuming some of it was from your own knowledge, but also you had to do some research. So what was that like for you?
Oh, that was a lot of fun. I would actually go. I have quite a few friends, like the working with Gen Z book. I have a lot of friends that work in HR, and they would just tell me stories of interviews on what actually happened during the interviews, and actually some of their more memorable employees on the jobs they did, the type of work they did, the excuses that they had, how they combated some of the things. That book was a lot of fun to write. And also working with interns, I've actually went to a lot of businesses that just had summer interns. And I would sit back and I would watch them. I would watch them interact with the other generations. And I've actually done that with all of the books because when I used to travel for work, I would actually sit back and the best place to actually I did a lot of my research was in the airports
Mm,
because you had every walk of life in the airport that walks through. Uh, Tons of conversations you overhear, polite ones, not so polite ones, yelling, screaming, you know, executives, family members. It was a lot of fun for me to actually sit down and actually take in everything. And then when I had all of my research done, I would actually go back and hit some of the books. I would go back and see some of the other authors and how they wrote things. One was Dave Ramsey. I looked at some of his books, how he broke things down, how I tweaked it a little bit more for my reading audience, and also other other publications out there as well. So I did a vast research on everything out there to incorporate what I needed to get across to my readers, but did it in a not condescending way, but more like a friendship and fellowship way. Like I'm actually helping you through this. I'm not making the choices for the readers either. I'm giving them the knowledge that they can make their own choices because everybody's life is different.
understood. Okay, yeah, no, I totally get what you mean by that. And it relates back to what you're saying before about how you kind of get on people's levels and talk to them, one on one. So that all kind of ties into it. And that's kind of how you gathered your research too, just by authentically, collecting the information. So really important stuff there. So yeah, I mean, you have all this down then, but something tells me you're not quite done. I'm wondering what's next on the horizon. What can people be excited for in the future?
Well, next is I'm actually going to work on another book. Probably go back into the stock market a little bit because of the more like day trading. I'm kind of tinkering around with that. That's a very complex thing.
Mm.
Also, other books. I have like two other books that I have in. in the chamber, if you will. One is with NFTs. I know I wrote that book a long time ago, but I still have to get it out. There's going to be more podcasts, and I'm also helping out with LPS publishing. So there's actually a lot more fiction work as well that's going to be coming out of for 2025 and 26, the remainder of 25 and upcoming 26. So it's uh, full of events, and probably going to do a lot more promotion of the books and doing more podcasts.
Understood. That's a whole complex array of stuff, but it's very exciting to hear. I mean, you kind of dabble in everything from self-help to nonfiction to fiction, and then, of course, the trading as well. So very admirable and really awesome that you're able to balance it all. What would you say to somebody who wants to walk in your footsteps and kind of do the same thing? How do you manage your time and getting into all these different things?
Starting a system with once that one s- book series or whatever you want to do is working and starting to generate money, and it can actually work on its own, then you can slowly, gradually implement a second one,
Mm,
and then follow the same process. And either you can alternate back and forth between two, which is it's a lot to do and it's a lot of work, but time management is your friend. Spreadsheets kind of are your friends with this, but actually having discipline to sit down and actually do the work and know when not to do the work. One major thing that I found out through this process is if I don't want to write, I'm not going to sit down and force myself to write, because once I do that, nothing comes out and it has to get redone. So when you feel like writing, write. If you don't feel like writing, don't do it. Find something else. Be productive in another way. Work on a cover, work with someone else, work on a blurb, work, you know, do a podcast, watch a TV show that gets inspiration, but don't force yourself to sit down and do something.
right. Yeah, no, I get that because then you're just gonna lose passion for it. You're gonna, just most likely drop it or procrastinate or whatever it is. So, okay, yeah, follow your instincts. Figure out, one task, a small task that can be accomplished, and then go to the more difficult stuff later on. I like that technique. That's really awesome. I really
Well,
appreciate that.
thank you, thank you. It took quite a lot of time to, hone that one, because I would sit down and force myself after a while. And then
Right.
after reading it, I'll come back like a day later and read it. I'm like, this is complete garbage. And I'll rip it up and I was like, okay, we're gonna go a different direction.
Mm, right.
And then I look back, it's like, oh, I could use that time for this, this, and this, but lessons learned.
Yeah, exactly. I get it. So hey, it's all about trial and error, figuring out what works best for you. I guess that's what we can all learn from this. So I'm curious to know, I mean, if you have any other last thoughts for the audience today, whether it be about writing or about, career improvement, anything else, what's something that we should leave them with today as we wrap up the episode?
There's two things. One, you're your own worst critic, hands down. No matter what anybody else can say, you are your own worst critic. And two, not everybody is going to support you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get that. So you got to kind of figure out exactly who's going to support you. Maybe it's yourself, but if you're a reverse critic, then maybe figure out somebody who can, fill that role too. I'm assuming you went through something similar to that since you mentioned that.
Yes, yes. Actually, other authors that I've taken some courses with kind of supported things, but finding out later they really didn't, because they actually took the items that I was working on and they did it themselves, but they did it worse. And they blame me for not giving them the right information because they didn't follow through with the proper processes and stuff. So when you find someone that actually supports you and actually sees your passion, hold on to them, because there's a lot out there that will say they support you on it, but honestly, they want to see themselves succeed more than you.
Understood. So yeah, just keep an eye out for who's on your team and who isn't quite on your team then. I like that. I mean, it's important stuff. So to keep in mind for sure. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. We shared a ton of information about a bunch of different areas.
Oh,
And if anyone interested, I mean, you just got to head to the links we're going to put in the description box and learn a little bit more about Magnus's wealth of information within all of his books and media. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been a joy.
Thank you, Danielle. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you very much.
Of course. Yeah. And to all of our audience members today, again, check out the links. If this conversation challenged your assumptions about Gen Z, about management, about loyalty, well, check out the links, learn more about it. Remember, the mission isn't just to inform you, it's to equip you with what you need to become an expert in your domain as well. So continue listening to this podcast, follow your dreams, keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. We'll see you next time, Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.